All right, so we're diving into sexual mysticism today. It seems like from the research you sent over, you're really interested in those gurus in the West, and how they've kind of promoted this whole thing.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, isn't it? I mean, how they've tried to kind of like blend ancient traditions with modern ideas, but I think as your research shows, sometimes it leads to like misinterpretation and yeah, potentially some problems.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So before we jump into all that, let's take a step back. Where does this whole sexual mysticism thing even come from?
Well, you can actually trace it back to like ancient shamanic practices.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and also tantric traditions.
Mm,
So, like with shamanism, they would use altered state of consciousness, and sometimes they would even use, ritualistic sex to connect with the divine.
wow.
And then you have tantra, particularly like the Vamachara traditions. They actually formalize this whole idea.
Formalized it. How so?
Well, it's like they created this whole framework where sexual experience is used to achieve spiritual goals.
So it's not just about sex. It's about using sex as a tool for spiritual, growth.
Exactly. It's about using that energy.
That's a pretty wild idea.
Yeah, and a key concept here is Kundalini energy.
Kundalini.
Yeah, it's this potent force, and it's believed to reside like at the base of the spine. And through specific practices, and this includes, practices involving sexual energy, this Kundalini energy is awakened, and it rises up, leading to heightened awareness and spiritual transformation.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. Kundalini energy, that's a new one for me. Can you unpack that a little bit? Like, how does it actually tie into this whole sexual mysticism thing?
Yeah, so think of it as like this dormant potential within us. And Tantra views sexual energy as like not just physical, right? But as like this powerful force that can be channeled for spiritual evolution. So the practices associated with Kundalini awakening, they aim to, harness and transform this energy. And this can lead to like all these spiritual insights and experiences.
Okay, so it's a pretty, intricate system, yeah?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's got a super rich history. But as it traveled westward, a lot of those like original nuances, they got lost in translation.
That makes sense. Kind of like a game of telephone, right? Where the message changes as it's passed along. So how did this concept, this ancient concept of sexual mysticism, how did it even make its way over to the Americas?
Well, it's been a fascinating journey. Gurus played a significant role. They brought their own interpretations of these traditions to the West.
Oh, okay.
And then, of course, you have the rise of the internet and digital media that really like amplified the spread, right? It's like packaging these ideas, marketing them as like paths to self-improvement and enlightenment.
Yeah, it's amazing how technology can do that, like make these ideas so readily available. But I mean, as we've been talking about, there's also potential for things to get, distorted
Oh, absolutely.
and even cause harm.
Yeah.
And you mentioned gurus, right? And your research, it kind of points to a few key figures here. Notably, Osho and Aleister Crowley.
hmm
What can you tell us about these two guys?
Well, both figures were they were definitely charismatic and very influential.
I could see that.
They attracted a huge following. Osho, for instance, he blended tantric ideas with Western psychology,
Hmm.
and it's like he presented this version of spirituality for the modern age.
Yeah, yeah, I could see how that would be appealing, especially in a world that's constantly looking for new ways to connect with, spirituality. But where do the problems actually start to arise?
Well, I think the problems start with the guru-disciple dynamic itself. When a guru is viewed as infallible, it creates an imbalance of power, and this can make followers really vulnerable to manipulation and even abuse,
Right.
especially when you're dealing with unconventional practices like the ones involving sexuality.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's almost like, the allure of the guru's teachings, they can kind of cloud your judgment, right?
hmm
And you become less likely to question their methods or their motives. You've included some research on Osho's concept of sex salvation, which seems pretty controversial. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Osho, he basically claimed that sexual energy is inherently divine,
Hmm.
and that by embracing it, we can actually achieve spiritual liberation.
Okay.
And he taught that repressing sexuality was the root of a lot of spiritual problems. So he was advocating for a path that like harness this energy for spiritual growth.
So he's kind of like turning that traditional view of sexuality on its head, right? Saying that embracing those desires is the key to enlightenment.
Exactly. And while there's definitely value in exploring and understanding our sexuality, Osho's approach, it raises some serious ethical and theological concerns. Like it distorts the understanding of God, of human sexuality, and the true path to salvation.
I can see how the lines can get blurred there between genuine spiritual seeking and something that's maybe more problematic. You also mentioned Aleister Crowley, and he seems like a completely different character from Osho. What's his connection to all of this?
Yeah, so Crowley, he developed this system called magic.
Magic with a K.
Yeah, with a K, and it aimed to manipulate spiritual forces to gain personal power. And while it's not directly linked to Tantra, his emphasis on, sexual rituals as a means of achieving this magical power, it has really resonated with some modern interpretations of sexual mysticism.
So it's less about spiritual liberation in this case and more about using sexual energy for personal gain and control.
Exactly. And, Crowley's system, it ultimately rejects external authority. This includes a personal god.
Okay.
And it promotes individual will as like the ultimate moral compass. So this raises serious questions about, the ethical framework of his system and the potential for harm when power is sought without any moral constraints.
I could see how that could lead down a slippery slope. It's like giving someone a loaded weapon without any safety instructions. It seems like we've just started, scratching the surface here
Yeah, definitely.
of these complex and controversial figures. Can you give us some specific examples of those controversies and those ethical issues that have surrounded Ogun Crowley?
Yeah, sure. So let's start with Osho. His ashrams, they were promoting freedom and spontaneity, right?
Yeah.
But they're also known for their like very strict rules and expectations. So it's like this paradox between his teaching and like the reality of life within his communities.
So it's like do what thou wilt, but only within Ozo's own system.
Right.
That does seem pretty contradictory.
Exactly. And, this control, it extended beyond the ashrams as well.
Really?
Yeah, Osho, he amassed a lot of wealth and power,
Mm.
and there were lots of accusations of manipulation, abuse, and even criminal activity within his organization.
Wow.
So, his teachings, they attracted people seeking spiritual exploration, but they also attracted people with maybe less noble intentions.
Yeah, that's a pretty stark reminder that, even spiritual teachings can be twisted and misused, especially when you have these power dynamics at play. What about Crowley? Were there similar controversies surrounding him?
Oh, absolutely. Crowley, he was no stranger to controversy. He rejected traditional morality, and his exploration of those taboo practices, including drug use and sexual experimentation, they earned him the label, the wickedest man in the world.
The wickedest man in the world.
Yeah.
That's quite a title.
And he was also associated with various occult orders and was accused of promoting a dangerous and an amoral philosophy.
It sounds like both his life and teachings were kind of shrouded in mystery and scandal.
Yes, he definitely cultivated that persona, embracing transgression, challenging those societal norms. And while some people saw him as like a visionary genius, others, they definitely saw him as a charlatan and a very dangerous influence.
It sounds like both Osho and Crowley were just incredibly complex figures,
Mm-hmm.
capable of both, inspiring and repelling people with their ideas and their actions, almost like they were walking contradictions,
Yeah.
embodying both the allure and the dangers of sexual mysticism.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So we've covered a lot of ground already, but I'm definitely eager to delve a little bit deeper into their teachings and maybe uncover those juicy contradictions that you mentioned earlier.
Let's do that. By examining like the specifics, we can get a better understanding of, how they attracted such passionate followers while also, raising some red flags for those who are seeking genuine spiritual growth.
Okay, I'm ready to peel back those layers and see what's underneath. Let's do it.
So we were talking about those juicy contradictions, right?
Yeah, those contradictions, especially in Osho's teachings, right? Like the tension between self-acceptance and self-transformation. How can you, embrace everything about yourself and still try to evolve and like transcend your limitations?
Right. It's one of the core paradoxes of his sister. On one hand, he really encouraged followers to accept every part of themselves, their desires, their flaws, everything. He argued that suppressing those natural impulses was harmful, and true freedom, like real freedom, came from embracing our true nature. You
So
know?
it's like radical self-love, but taken to the extreme.
Yeah, exactly. But then on the other hand, he also emphasized this need for self-transformation, for moving beyond our limitation and achieving a higher state of consciousness. Like he talked about um, the potential for human beings to become, supermen.
Supermen.
Yeah, transcending their ordinary selves and achieving, enlightenment.
But how do you reconcile those two ideas?
Right.
It seems like they're pulling in opposite directions. Like if you fully accept yourself as you are, where's the motivation to change or grow?
Yeah, and that's the inherent tension there. It's Osho seemed to suggest that by embracing our desires, we could somehow like transmute them into something higher. That the energy of our passions could actually fuel our spiritual evolution.
Hmm.
But the specifics of how that would propose to happen, it was very, very vague, and often left, open to interpretation.
So it sounds like he's offering a pretty tantalizing promise, but there's no clear roadmap to get there.
Yeah, and that lack of clarity, that can be dangerous, especially when you're dealing with something as powerful and potentially volatile as sexuality.
Right. And that ambiguity, I mean, it creates space for all sorts of interpretations and practices within his movement, right?
Oh yeah,
And some of which were, clearly harmful and exploitative.
precisely.
Were there any other contradictions within Osho's teachings that you found um, particularly troubling?
Well, his views on freedom and control were also pretty paradoxical.
How so?
Well, because, Osho preached freedom, but his ashrams were actually highly structured environments and with very strict rules and expectations.
Hmm.
And followers were expected to, like, surrender their personal autonomy to his authority, often giving up their possessions and living communally under his direction.
So it was freedom, but within a very, very controlled environment. It sounds like a recipe for manipulation.
It was, and there were many, many accounts of abuse and exploitation within Osho's communities. It seemed like that emphasis on surrendering to the master, it really created a power dynamic that made followers vulnerable to manipulation and even harm.
It's a reminder that, any spiritual teaching, no matter how appealing it might seem on the surface, can be uh, twisted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And used for unethical purposes. It's like that old saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
What about Crowley? Did you find any similar contradictions in his system?
Oh, Crowley's system was full of paradoxes too, like his famous saying, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law."
Yeah.
That suggests a philosophy of like radical individualism, right? Where your personal desire is like supreme.
Hmm.
But then at the same time, Crowley also established a very complex system of rituals, symbols, and hierarchical structures within his occult orders.
So ultimate freedom, but within a very structured and rule-bound system. Doesn't that seem like a contradiction in terms?
It does, and this tension, right, between individual will and external authority. That was a recurring theme. In Crowley's life and teachings, he was constantly pushing boundaries, challenging societal norms, and seeking to transcend, those limitations.
Right.
But he also created his own set of rules and hierarchies, demanding obedience and conformity from his followers.
It's like he was trying to have it both way, to be, the ultimate rebel, but also be the ultimate authority figure.
Yeah, and that duality is maybe what makes him such a fascinating and enigmatic figure,
Yeah.
Like he embodies the allure of power and that desire for liberation, but also the dangers of egoism and the potential for harm when those desires are just unchecked.
It's like a cautionary tale,
Ye-
reminding us that the pursuit of power and freedom without a solid ethical foundation can easily lead to destruction.
Right.
So we've talked about the internal contradictions within these systems, but what about the external contradictions? Like how do their teachings actually clash with, reality or established truths?
Well, both Osho and Crowley, they made claims that were just not supported by evidence. Or scientific understanding, like Osho, for example, he talked about manipulating sexual energy
Mm,
and using it to achieve, higher states of consciousness.
right.
But those concepts, they just lack any scientific basis.
So they were essentially using like scientific sounding language to make their mystical claims seem more credible.
Exactly. And this reliance on pseudoscience is a common tactic. Among those promoting sexual mysticism, they use terms like energy, vibration, and transformation,
Right.
but without any real evidence to actually back up their claims.
It's like they're trying to dress up mysticism in a lab coat to make it seem more legitimate.
Yeah, precisely. And Crowley, he also made claims that conflicted with scientific understanding. Like he believed that through his magical practices, he could manipulate the forces of nature and achieve supernatural powers.
Hmm.
But again, there's no evidence to support those claims.
So it's like they were creating their own reality based on their own, beliefs and desires rather than on any objective evidence or scientific understanding.
Exactly. And this disregard for evidence and logic is a huge red flag when evaluating any spiritual teaching. It's important to approach those claims with like a healthy dose of skepticism and look for evidence to support them.
That's such an important reminder. It's so easy to get swept up in, the charisma of a teacher or the allure of their teachings
Right.
and forget to actually critically evaluate what they're saying.
And it's not just about scientific evidence. We also need to think about the ethical implications of these teachings, like Osho's concept of sex salvation, for example. That completely disregards the potential for harm and exploitation. That can arise when sexuality is used as a means to achieve those spiritual goals.
Right. It's like giving someone a blank check to justify any behavior, under the guise of spirituality.
Exactly. And Crowley's rejection of traditional morality and his emphasis on individual will as the ultimate authority, that can also lead to some really dangerous consequences.
Right.
Like when there are no ethical boundaries, anything goes.
It seems like both Osho and Crowley were operating outside of any moral or ethical constraints,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, a recipe for disaster.
It is, and it's a reminder that any spiritual teaching, no matter how appealing it might seem, can be very, very dangerous if it's not grounded in a solid ethical framework. We need to be careful not to confuse the pursuit of power or personal gratification with genuine spiritual growth.
So we've seen how the teachings of both Osho and Crowley, they're riddled with contradictions, both internally and externally.
Mm.
They clash with logic, science, and basic ethical principles. Yet both men garnered huge followings, and they continue to have an impact on modern interpretations of sexual mysticism. What explains that enduring influence?
That's a fascinating question, isn't it? I mean, despite all the obvious flaws, the dangers in their teachings, there's something about their charisma, their boldness, and their willingness to challenge conventional thinking that continues to resonate with some people.
Yeah, I think you hit on something really important there. People are drawn to those who dare to be different, who offer alternative ways of thinking and being.
Right.
And in a world that often feels restrictive and limiting, the promise of freedom and transcendence, like through sexuality, can be incredibly appealing.
It can, and both Osho and Crowley, they tapped into that deep human longing for liberation, for breaking free from those society constraints and exploring, the full potential of our being. They offered this vision of spirituality that embraced the body and its desires rather than, denying them or repressing them.
So in a way, they were rebels. They challenged the status quo, and they offered a different path, even if that path was ultimately flawed and dangerous.
They were. And that rebellious spirit, that's often what attracts people to these teachings, especially those who feel disenfranchised or disillusioned,
Yeah.
with traditional religions or societal norms.
It's like they're saying, forget the rules, embrace your desires, and find your own your own truth.
Yeah, exactly. But as we've seen, that message, it can be both liberating and dangerous. It's crucial to remember that true freedom comes with responsibility, and that genuine spiritual growth should lead us towards greater wisdom, compassion, and ethical behavior, not just the fulfillment of our own desires.
That's a really important distinction. It's not about just doing whatever we want.
Right.
It's about understanding the consequences of our choices and striving to live in a way that benefits both ourselves and others.
Exactly.
We spent a lot of time unpacking the teachings and controversies surrounding Osho and Crowley. Let's shift gears a bit and explore some of those broader trends and implications of sexual mysticism in general.
Okay.
I'm particularly interested in the ways that sexual mysticism has been kind of integrated with other spiritual traditions like Buddhism and neo-paganism.
Hmm.
Can you shed some light on those connections?
Sure. It's fascinating, how these ideas have been interwoven with various belief systems, often leading to some very unique interpretations and practices. For example, Buddhism, right?
Yeah,
It generally emphasizes detachment from desire, but certain tantric schools within that tradition have incorporated, sexual symbolism and practices.
really. That's surprising. How can a philosophy that focuses on, transcending desire embrace practices that seem to revolve around it?
Well, it's all about context and intention. In Tantric Buddhism, those practices aren't about seeking pleasure for its own sake,
Okay.
Instead, they're viewed as skillful means to achieve enlightenment. So imagine harnessing the energy of desire and transforming it into wisdom and compassion.
So it's like redirecting that energy towards a higher purpose.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the power of desire, but not being controlled by it. And you can imagine, these teachings have also been subject to misinterpretation and abuse,
Yeah,
even within, a tradition that's as disciplined as Buddhism.
that makes sense. It seems like whenever you're dealing with something as powerful and as multifaceted as sexuality, there's always the potential for it to be used for good or for ill.
Right.
What about neo-paganism? How does sexual mysticism fit into that worldview?
Well, that's a fascinating intersection, Neo-paganism, with its emphasis on nature, embodiment, and the sacred feminine, often embraces sensuality as a natural part of spiritual expression. So some traditions within neo-paganism, they incorporate sexual rituals or symbolism as a way to connect with the divine or celebrate the cycles of nature.
So it's less about achieving like personal enlightenment and more about connecting with a sense of the sacred and the natural world.
Yeah, exactly. It's about honoring the earth, the body, and the life force that flows through all things.
Right.
And for some neo-pagans, sexuality is seen as a natural expression of that life force,
Hmm.
a way to connect with the divine and to celebrate the interconnectedness of all things.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. Like it's like reclaiming the sacredness of sexuality
Hmm.
rather than viewing it as something, sinful or shameful.
Yeah. And this reclaiming of the body and its desires, that's a common thread that you see running through and many interpretations of sexual mysticism,
Right.
whether it's in the context of tantra, shamanism, neo-paganism, or other spiritual traditions.
It seems like there's a deep human longing to integrate our sexuality with our spirituality.
Yeah.
To find a way to honor and celebrate this fundamental aspect of our being.
Absolutely. And while there are, healthy and ethical ways to explore that integration, it's crucial to be aware of the potential dangers and to approach any spiritual teaching that involves, sexuality with discernment and a critical eye.
Well said. I think I've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive, but I'm eager to continue exploring these ideas. and delve a little bit deeper into those nuances and complexities of sexual mysticism.
Yeah, me too. In our final part, we'll unpack some of the pseudoscientific claims that are often associated with sexual mysticism, and we'll explore the ethical implications of these teachings in a little bit more depth, and consider what a truly healthy and balanced approach to sexuality and spirituality, what that might actually look like.
That sounds like a plan. Let's take a short break, and then we'll dive back in for the final leg of our exploration. So let's talk about those pseudoscientific claims. The ones that are often used to kind of back up these sexual mysticism teachings.
Yeah, yeah, let's get into that. One of the most common ones you hear is all about chakras, right? And nadis, these supposed energy centers and channels in the body.
Yeah, I've heard those terms before, but I'm not really sure what they are. Like, are they actually real, or is it more of a symbolic thing?
Well, I mean, scientifically speaking, there's no evidence to support that they actually exist as like physical things. They're described as these spinning wheels of energy, or channels that you can manipulate for spiritual purposes. But no anatomical studies have ever actually like confirmed their presence.
So it's not like you can like dissect a body and point to a chakra the way you could point to a heart or a lung.
Right, exactly. And there are claims that, people with special abilities can see them, or that you can measure them with certain devices. But again, none of those claims have held up under scientific scrutiny. It's important to remember that just because something's described in like ancient texts, or it's part of a long-standing tradition, it doesn't necessarily mean it's scientifically accurate.
Yeah, that's true. It's easy to just assume that, if something's been around for a long time, it must be true. But, we got to be critical thinkers and look for evidence, right?
Yeah.
What about this idea that we can like manipulate these chakras through practices like yoga or meditation? Is there any truth to that?
Well, yoga and meditation, they definitely have real benefits, for our physical and mental well-being. But there's no scientific evidence to suggest that they're actually affecting these supposed energy centers. The positive effects of these practices, they can be explained through um, well understood physiological and psychological mechanisms.
So it's not that the practices are ineffective. It's just that maybe the explanation for why they work, it lies in the realm of science, not in some mystical energy system.
Exactly. And while chakras and nadis might, hold symbolic meaning within certain traditions, it's important not to confuse those symbols with actual physical realities, because attributing real world effects to these imaginary constructs, it can be really misleading and even potentially harmful. People might forego evidence-based treatments in favor of unproven practices.
Right, right. That makes sense. Okay, let's talk about another claim that we see pop up a lot. This idea that orgasm can be a pathway to experiencing non-duality. Can you maybe break down what non-duality is and explain how this claim is supposed to work?
Okay, so non-duality, it's a complex philosophical concept. You find it in a lot of different spiritual traditions. But basically, it refers to this idea that there's ultimately no separation between the self and the universe, that all is one. And so, as some proponents of sexual mysticism, they argue that during orgasm, we can experience a temporary merging with our partner, or a sense of oneness with everything, and that this can be like a glimpse into the non-dual nature of reality.
So it's like orgasm gives us like a taste of what it's like to transcend our individual ego and experience unity with the cosmos.
Yeah, some people describe it that way, but the problem is that feeling of oneness, while it might be powerful and even profound in the moment, it's fleeting. It doesn't last. Orgasm is a physiological and psychological experience, and while it can definitely produce those feelings of connection and transcendence, it's not a reliable path to enlightenment, or a way to like permanently dissolve the ego. To equate a physical sensation, however intense, with a profound spiritual awakening is just misleading.
It's like mistaking a shooting star for the entire galaxy. Like it's beautiful, it's awe-inspiring, but it's just a tiny glimpse of something much, much faster and much more complex.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, and it highlights the danger of focusing on the experience itself, rather than the underlying principles and practices that lead to genuine spiritual growth. Chasing after these specific states of consciousness can become like a form of spiritual materialism. We're more concerned with the feeling than with the substance.
Right. It's like chasing after a high rather than cultivating, true wisdom and compassion. What about the ethical implications of this claim? Are there any concerns there?
Oh, absolutely. When the pursuit of a specific experience, like orgasm, is presented as a spiritual goal, it can create a situation where individuals they feel pressured or obligated to engage in sexual activity, even if it goes against their own values or boundaries. And this opens the door for manipulation and abuse, especially within groups or relationships with uneven power dynamics.
It's like saying the ends justify the means, which can be a very, very dangerous way of thinking, especially in the realm of spirituality.
Exactly. True spiritual growth, it should never come at the expense of our, ethical integrity or the well-being of others. And we need to be wary of any teachings that encourage us to bypass our own moral turnness, or that suggest that certain actions are justified, in the pursuit of some spiritual goal.
It seems like we keep coming back to this theme of discernment, of questioning everything, not just accepting things at face value, especially when it comes to teachings that involve sexuality.
Yeah, discernment is crucial. It's about being, critical thinkers, looking for evidence to support claims, considering the ethical implications of what we're being taught, and it's also about listening to our own intuition and not being afraid to question authority, even if that authority comes from someone we respect or admire.
You mentioned earlier that we'd be circling back to Osho's concept of sex salvation. Given what we've just been talking about, the potential for manipulation and abuse, I'm a little hesitant to even go there. But I also think it's important to kind of address this head on. You know.
Yeah, I agree. Osho's teachings on this topic are particularly problematic. He basically argued that sexual energy is the most powerful force in the universe, and that by embracing and transmuting that energy through various practices, we can achieve enlightenment.
So it's like free love is the path to spiritual liberation.
Yeah, that was a simple theme in his teachings. He believed that repressing sexual desire was the root of a lot of psychological and spiritual problems, and that by liberating ourselves from those inhibitions, we could achieve a higher state of consciousness. But as we've seen throughout this whole discussion, his teachings often lacked a solid ethical foundation, and his own behavior it contradicted the principles he preached.
It's like he was using spirituality as a cover for his own, hedonistic desires and his need for power and control.
That's definitely a valid interpretation, and the consequences of his teachings, they were often devastating for his followers. There were numerous accounts of abuse, manipulation, and exploitation within his communities, all justified under the guise of spiritual liberation.
It's a tragic reminder of how easily spiritual teachings can be twisted and used for harmful purposes. It seems like we've uncovered a lot of darkness here within the world of sexual mysticism. Are there any like glimmers of light, any positive aspects or teachings that we can take away from this exploration?
That's a great question. While we've been, focusing on the potential dangers and distortions, it's important to acknowledge that there are also, individuals and traditions that approach this topic with integrity and respect. The key, as we've discussed, is discernment. There are teachings that emphasize the sacredness of sexuality, the importance of consent and respect, and the potential for genuine spiritual growth through the integration of body, mind, and spirit.
So it's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's about being thoughtful and discerning about the teachings we embrace. and the teachers we follow.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that sexuality is a powerful force. It can be used for good or for ill, and that true spiritual growth should always lead us towards greater love, compassion, and ethical behavior.
That's a beautiful message to end on. Thank you for guiding us through this uh, complex and often challenging topic. I think we've all gained a much deeper understanding of the potential pitfalls and possibilities of sexual mysticism.
It's been my pleasure, and just remember the journey towards truth and wisdom. It's ongoing, and it requires us to be both open-minded and discerning. By staying curious, questioning everything, and listening to our own inner compass, we can navigate the complexities of spirituality and find a path that leads us toward genuine growth and fulfillment.
Well said. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep growing.